I'm reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 31 to 38. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, then reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. Good to see you today, and good to see you. My name is Adrian. Somebody pointed out that they saw my name as the speaker today, and I saw that as well. And I also saw that today's message was about secrets, and maybe the secret is what we look like under the mask. Maybe some, but to be honest, I was surprised by that, and so my secret is I didn't know that's what the message was called. And it probably means I missed an email sometime this week or sending an email I was supposed to. So, but one thing's not a secret. This morning we're having a good time. I've been having some fun. I had no idea. I thought, why did someone's radio just come on over the speakers at the start? And then Kevin celebrating the chance to see our faces, and that's great. Do you know the name Nims Persia? Does anyone know that name? Have you heard that name? Neither had I, so that's fine. But maybe you've heard the name Tenzing Norgay. Is that familiar? Okay, familiar? If you haven't heard that, Edmund Hillary. Have you heard that name? Okay, maybe more there. Edmund Hillary was the first person to summit Mount Everest, and so that's why that name is well known. He did it with a guy named Tenzing Norgay, who is a Sherpa from Nepal. And somehow, because he's a Sherpa and from Nepal, people know his name less, even though he was there and he was on the summit. And in fact, the only picture we have of that time was Edmund Hillary taking it of Tenzing Norgay. Anyways, Nims Persia is an adventurer, a mountaineer. He's Nepalese. And I love the outdoors. I love hiking. And I'm kind of fascinated by big feats of things like mountaineering. And I don't do all those things. Don't have those significant achievements, so I just grow a beard so I look like maybe I do. Anyways, here's a picture of Nims Persia, and he looks like he might get out in the outdoors a little bit. I became familiar with him through this movie, and it's called 14 Peaks. It's on Netflix right now, and I saw it and I thought, yeah, that looks like a movie I want to watch. And I watched it, and it blew my mind. 14 peaks, the idea is there's 14 peaks in the world that are over 8,000 meters. When I see these things, I like to remind myself of the mountains I've been on top of, and they're not the biggest in BC. Mount Robson is well known. It is not even 4,000 meters. The tallest mountain, I believe, is just over 4,000 meters, is Mount Waddington. I know it's the tallest in BC. I just can't remember its elevation. So when you get the idea, I don't know if you've driven through Revelstoke and been like, whoa. Well, double that and some. And he's trying to get to the top of 14 of these. And someone has done this before. There was the first person was about, 30, 40 years ago. It tells it in the movie. And he did it in about 16 years. People saw that and thought, and this is a mountaineering thing, it's like, I think I can beat that. Maybe I can do it faster. I can get all to the top of them faster. So the world record prior to 2019 was 7 years and 11 months. Nims Persia said, I'm going to try and do it in 7 months. The mountaineering world, or anyone else with a human brain, said, that's impossible. And so he decided, might say something under that if you can read that, says nothing is impossible. He decided to call it Project Possible because everybody was saying it's impossible. That's how he solved that problem. So he goes on, 2019, gets a team together, other Nepalese, and they're all Nepalese. And part of the story is people don't even know the name of Tenzing Norgay, our Nepalese people. We have a lot of mountaineering, but we all hear about the Western ones. It's time for the Nepalese climbers to make a statement that we can do this too. So they do it, they decide to do it in a what seems like impossible fashion. He climbs on April 23rd, summits Annapurna. It's the 10th highest only. On the way down, so they get to the summit, all good. On the way down, they find an injured climber. I think he was on his way up. And he is a military guy, and there's no man left behind. And he sees this guy and says, we have to do something about this. If you know and read any of these things, you stop to help, they will probably die, and you will probably die. I've read enough to know that that's a dangerous idea. It's great for humanity, but it's bad for survival. And he says, we got to help. So they try and help. They're not going to be able to move him. So they decide to hustle down to base camp, find a helicopter, get a helicopter. Helicopters can't land in these kind of heights. The air's too thin and disable. So then he gets on a rope and a harness on the bottom of a helicopter. He and a buddy fly up the mountain, hanging tethered, and then they rescue this guy, get him up, they take him down and come back and get Nims, and then they're back. That's mountain one. Two and a half weeks later, Dhaulagiri, the 7th highest mountain. The pace isn't fast enough. 3 days later, Kanchenjunga, the 3rd highest mountain. They go up to the top of that, they come down, they find, and in these situations, he's doing it all in one go, which is not how you do these if you've read this. You go up a bit, you go down a bit. You go up 2, you come down 1, you go down. You go up, you go up, go up. He's doing them in one day. On his way down to base camp, they find somebody who's run out of oxygen, which most of the hikers there use, and he's lying on the ground, incoherent basically, barely gets words out. This guy will die. Nim says, we're staying with him. Give him his oxygen. Maybe we can. They stay for hours. The friends are running out of oxygen. He says, you go ahead. They go ahead. He stays with them. The oxygen runs out. This guy doesn't make it. Nims has been with him for hours. It's night now. He's been on this mountain for, I think at this point, 17, 24 hours. I can't remember what it is, but way too long. And now he's out of oxygen, and he hikes down 11 hours to get to base camp. The way down was very different. He had altitude sickness at the end of that, but a week later he goes to base camp of Everest, and they summit Everest. And while he's coming down, and to summit Everest in one day, you leave early. You always do, even if you're at base camp 4 on one of the approaches. But they leave a little earlier because they're going from base camp, all the way up. So they get up and summit before anyone else. On his way back down, he took a picture. And it was really hard to get down because everybody else is going up. And it's become a bit of a tourism thing to go up Everest. So you may have seen this picture in the news in 2019. And at this point, people started to understand that there's this guy out there named Nims Persia because he took this photo that has all sorts of questions to it, doesn't it? And he became famous through this photo, not because he's a Nepalese climber who's climbing all these peaks. Nobody knew about it yet until this came out. Oh yeah, and by the way, he took that picture, got down the mountain, went up Lhotse, which is the second highest that day, summited them both within the same day. Then the next day he went up Manipura, so in 48 hours he summited 3 of the 4 highest mountains in the world. The movie goes on, go watch it. It is mind-blowing. Even if you don't like hiking, I think you'll enjoy it. But let's just say, if you're ever on a mountain and in need of some help, if NIMS Persia is on your team, you're doing fine, okay? So what does that got to do with Mark? Well, we're talking about Mark 8:31 to 38. And Mark is 16 chapters long, and this is sort of the middle of the journey. And it is a pinnacle of sorts. There's a real climax that happens here. Last week, Kevin was talking about Mark 1, and it talked about the good news. Right in Mark 1, this is the beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. Good news. Mark wrote this to the church in Rome. This is about 30 or so years after Jesus' death and resurrection. Mark writes this letter to the church in Rome. The church in Rome is experiencing persecution because there's been a fire in Rome, and when there's a fire, it's got to be someone's fault. And I don't know the story, nobody knows the story, but Nero decided it was the Christians, and so now they're being persecuted for this. They're in extreme persecution in Rome. They're suffering. They're oppressed people. And when you live in an oppressed empire, oppressive empire, you go around and you hear statements, you see signs, it's on the money, it's on the banners, Caesar is Lord. Don't you forget it. Caesar, the Son of God, they would say, who conquers all lands. And he brings peace, Pax Romana, by shedding blood on the cross. They have the power, they have the control to these people that are receiving this letter. These people this letter is about. They are the oppressed. They are the dominated nation. So what's the good news that Mark's talking about? Well, as the story goes on, this guy, Jesus, is on the scene, and he starts spending time with oppressed people. He starts walking with them. He starts healing them miraculously. He's teaching them. He's showing these wondrous signs of amazing things he can do, and he's gathering them, and they are gathering these oppressed people. It's more and more and more. It's climbing to this climax. And Jesus goes to this place called Caesarea Philippi. And Caesarea Philippi is a city that was built by Herod, not Herod the Great, but his son, nephew, uncle, something like that. That Herod built this. Herod is a Jew who's been given the authority for this nation by Rome, so he's a sellout ruler of the Holy Land. He built this city. Then the city's Caesarea, yes, Caesar, named after Tiberius Caesar. It's also the location of the Greek god of Pan. So this is a place of serious religious, spiritual, world significance, pagan religion significance. It's a place of the other powers at be. And Jesus goes, hey, who do people say that I am? Who do people say that I am? This is found in Mark 8:29-30. Jesus says, who do people say I am? And they say, well, a lot of things. You know, prophet, maybe Elijah. And then he asks the question in Mark 8:29, who do you say that I am? And Peter speaks up for the group. And he says, you are the Messiah. And Jesus goes, all right, don't tell anyone. But is this not the top of the summit? Biblical, Jewish, Hebrew history They were exiled in Babylon. Exiled. They lost. Taken away from their own country, sent away, imprisoned away. That was 600 years ago, 500 years ago. It keeps happening because it doesn't happen in one night. Eventually, they're allowed, permitted to return to their land and start rebuilding some of their personhood, their culture, their community, their faith. Then, during that time, they experienced 4 more centuries of oppression. Have you heard of Alexander the Great? Yeah, not great for if you're a Hebrew. That's just getting conquered. That happened. And eventually, the Greeks, receded. And then it was an Egyptian and Syrian empires. And those two kind of bordered on the Holy Land, the place that they call home. And so they just kept fighting over their house. Could you imagine if someone is occupying you, but then someone comes in just to beat them and occupy you better, and then it comes back and forth? That was a few centuries of that. And then finally, the Roman Empire takes over. They've been losing the game. And I like to think about it like a sport. We keep losing the game. We got a basketball team, you have a basketball team, but our team is always losing. But LeBron James just showed up and he's wearing our jersey. Game on. Or maybe it's a mountain thought, and we're in this mountain and we're in this situation, and the mountain is way too daunting. But Nim's Persia just showed up. He's with us. These guys are thinking, maybe we're thinking, we've got Jesus, and look at him, look at him, look at him. He's the Messiah, the Messiah. Yes, this is Messiah. This is good news. We're gonna do this. Enough of this. Our God is bigger. Our God is stronger. We got Jesus. Here we go. Go, go, go. They're fired up. And at that point, we get to Mark 8:31-38. And he, Jesus, began to teach them that the Son of Man, and just let's pause there. The Son of Man. No. LeBron James doesn't show up and say, oh, who are you? Average citizen. That's not what he says. Jesus, what are you talking about? Messiah, Son of God, those are good names. Son of Man, that's a little understated. It is understated. It's a title that identifies with us. It also connects to this promise, this sort of obscure promise in Daniel, where we hear this term, Son of Man. It gives a picture of everlasting authority. He says, this Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Suffer, be rejected, be killed? We've been losing. Jesus shows up. He's amazing. Our God is bigger. Our God is stronger. Ah! Wait a sec, what? Sorry, pardon, Jesus? You're going to lose the game. What? Well, why would you lose the game? You don't have to. No, it says he must suffer. He must be killed. No, what? What are you talking about? So then Peter, Jesus is speaking just plainly about this is just, yep. Peter's like, oh, Jesus. Takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. Jesus. No, you're Jesus. We're going to win. We know losing. We've been doing it for 600 years. But we got you. The 5,000, remember that meal? Walking on water? That guy who was sick and you healed him. Remember he was dead? No, we've got you. We're not losing anymore. He says, no, Jesus. I don't think he just says no. I think he says, nope. It's inconceivable. It's wrong. Jesus is on our team. But then Jesus looks at his disciples, and he rebukes Peter. He says, Peter, nope. And then he says, get behind me, Satan. That gets your attention. Oh, Satan, the adversary. Peter thought, Jesus is on my team. Jesus says, whoa, that statement? Now you're playing against me. You're not on my team. You're my adversary all of a sudden with that comment. Satan, the deceiver. How is Peter being deceived? What lie is he believing, telling, living? He thinks the game is about power. But love is not a power game. And the game is love. Pax Romana, that's peace by shedding blood on the cross. That's peace by power. Jesus brings peace by shedding his blood on the cross. That's peace by love. It's a cruciform game, not a power game. It's a game of submission. The cross is a revelation of who God is and how he does it. It's also a revelation of the power and addiction and the control issues that maybe we have. Not just the baddies, not just the Romans, or not just the Pharisees or the teachers of the law, the high priests, but even Peter. As you go on, if you read this, I encourage you to do it today. Go read what keeps happening in the next couple of chapters. Watch James and John. These are the closest ones out of the 12 to Jesus. They don't get it. They're thinking power. So it includes Peter, James, John, the rest. And today I wonder, what about you and me? As I've been reading this and wrestling with this, I've been thinking, what about Adrian? Am I playing a game of love, or am I addicted to power and control? We've been through seasons of COVID mandates. And there's convoys, or was, maybe still is. There's opinions, and I'm a part of those. And it's tense, it's hard, isn't it? But are the ideas of solutions that I talk about, think about, dream about, are those love solutions or power solutions? There's a war going on in Ukraine. As I heard about this happening, I'm not that informed when it comes to the news, so I just had to wrestle. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And then I hear it is happening. And I thought, and I'm going to admit today in front of you, my first thought was, I think there needs to be a drone strike and they take him out. That was my thought. And I caught that thought and I thought, wow. That's an interesting thought, Adrian. That was your first solution. Perhaps you're better than me. You didn't think that. I'll admit, I'm addicted to power and power solutions. And I am thankful for Mark, who wrote this story down and passed it on, and for those who chose to preserve it and record it and repeat it so that we could read it. So I know that I'm not alone. At least I got Peter. So Jesus calls the crowd to him and along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Jesus' way is another way. And he invites us to follow, and following him is following his self-denying, nonviolent way of love. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Now, I remember that this is written about an oppressed people. And it's written to, 30 years later, 40 years later, some more oppressed people. I don't know about you, but in these past number of years, and I think the pandemic has given us more time to become aware and reflect. Maybe that's happened for you. And some of the things we're doing in our church. As I learn more about Indigenous history, as I'm in my organization interacting with some of the BIPOC staff that I have, as colleagues, as I consider the LGBTQ community, as I meet people with disabilities or suffering from serious illnesses, as I'm hearing and asking questions about some friends of mine who are female, one of which I was walking with in Vancouver 8 a.m. one morning, and she said, "I'm so glad we're doing this. I would never do this." And I thought, do what? And she said, walk downtown alone in the morning. And I thought, I'd never think that. As I become more aware of singles around me and what it's like for them compared to what it's like for me, I'm becoming aware of my privileges and a lot of power that comes with that. I'm an able-bodied, middle-class, married, heterosexual, white male in Canada. Every word of that statement is saturated with privilege. As I think about that, and I read this letter to these people about these people, I have to admit, in other words, I am not oppressed. So, and it's far more likely that I've somehow participated, consciously or unconsciously, in some form of oppression of others than having been oppressed. So when it says deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Jesus, how much more does that mean for me? For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Are we more interested in preserving our world and holding on to something, preserving our privileges, or self-sacrificial love kind of life? There's this little phrase pops up again, the gospel, the good news. Says, whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this. I work for Young Life, where we try and reach teenagers with the love of God. In the same way, KGM's trying to reach people in need in our city with the love of God. And so we think a lot about how to communicate that God loves you, and we call that the gospel. And we think about it a lot. As I read the gospel here, I'm warned and I'm redirected to not theologize it. Is that a word? Is that a word? All right. Troy says it's a word, so it's a word. Today it's a word. Maybe not tomorrow, but today. Theologize. Well, I know Mark didn't theologize it. He just simply told the story. Why must the Son of Man suffer and die? That's a question we might ask, and we try and figure it out. Why must he? Mark doesn't spend any time with that. You might as well ask, well, why must have we killed him? What's that about? If we're going to ask the one question, we better ask the other. But it seems to be it's not what it's explaining. It's just telling us the story that the kingdom is coming near. That God is for us, even the oppressed among us. He is with us, even with all our choices that we have. And in spite of the fact in our choices that we seem to choose not God so much, God keeps choosing us. It was in some of the songs we sang this morning. He keeps choosing us again and again and again and again. And this story is about how he chooses us, and we were choosing not him, Peter was starting to choose not him at this pinnacle moment. And he still says, Peter, I'm with you again and again. And it's for the sake of our transformation. What transforms us is another question that I ask. And I think this is Peter telling Mark this story. Because Mark wasn't there, but Peter tells Mark this story, and Mark says, oh, and he tells this story known as the book of Mark to the people in Rome and whoever else might hear it. Thanks be to God, even us. They wrote it down for oppressed people. Why? Why did they do it? Because it would transform us. This story would transform us. Not a logical argument, not a list of instructions, not a theological explanation full of salvation mechanics, not a list of beliefs or a group of homogeneous believers that believe those beliefs, but a story. This story. It's called the gospel. It's good news. It's a story, not an explanation. It's a story that gives us a picture of God and his love, and it is a consensual love. It's a love that suffers to win with love, not a coercive love. That's one that uses power to win and avoid suffering. No, this is a consensual love that suffers to win with love. We don't need to theologize it. Mark didn't. He simply tells the story. And if we're listening, it's an unexpected, maybe secret. Maybe that's where it came from. It's an unexpected story about God's love for us in the way of love. If we're honest, it reveals and rebukes our propensity to choose power over love. And if we're willing, it has an invitation to join the story, tell the story with our own lives. I'm going to finish with this. We get to hear from two McKnights today. We got Troy McKnight, and here's Scott McKnight in his book called The Community Called Atonement. Talks about this life. He says, a life shaped by the cross is a life bent on dying to self in order to love God, self, others, and the world. And a life shaped by the cross sees in the cross God becoming the victim, identifying with the victim, suffering injustice, and shaping a cruciform pattern of life for all who would follow Jesus. The cross reshapes all life. If anyone would come after me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. You and I are invited into that love, into that life. What will you choose today? God, thank you for this time where we can hear from you, about you, and see you. God, thank you that you keep choosing us. Thank you that you still yet invite us. Help us as we choose that today. Amen.
Do you ever have that